This is Introduction to Section 4.4. This is Part 2. And I've got some more things, again, you're going to have to add to your note section. So if you can find an open spot or a blank page in your Section 4.4 notes, as we go through here, I want you to add this to it. So I've put two shapes here. I put two triangles here. And part of the reason I put this on here is because I want to go through and, again, kind of rehash or re-explain as well how to understand corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Okay, so as you look here at this picture, you have two triangles. You have triangle ADC, and then you have triangle ABC. Okay, so you've got ADC and ABC. All right, and as you look at these two triangles, if you can tell, we can tell they're congruent by angle, angle side, and angle, angle side. So I could say from this picture that triangle will go ACD, triangle ACD is congruent to triangle. If I go ACD, I have to go CAB. And I could say that those two triangles are congruent by angle, angle side. Okay. Now, what we're talking about when we talk about corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Now that I've said that the two triangles are congruent, I can say any one of these unmarked sides or angles that I want are congruent to each other, that are corresponding. Okay? That's what essentially it means. Once I say that all the triangles are congruent, all the corresponding parts, sides, and angles are congruent as well. So I could say, for example, let's see here. Side AD is congruent to side CB. Or I could say angle DAC is congruent to angle BCA. Okay, and if I were to go and mark these, this guy right here, those two, and I could say this one and that one are congruent to each other. I could also say that side AB now is congruent to side CD. Okay? Now you'll notice now all the sides and angles are marked. Okay? So I could say I could use any one of those three for the reason of CPCTC. Because once I prove that the triangles are congruent, now I know every single corresponding angle and side are congruent to that as well. So I could use any one of those three as a proof. Okay, now let's take a look here. We've already talked about that top proof. Let's take a look here at this bottom proof as we're going through here. And we'll put our line in the middle here as well. Okay. So as you look at this proof, in the given it says AB is congruent to AC, and they have that marked, and M is the midpoint of BC. Okay, so we could put that in our given as we're looking here. So we've got AB is congruent to AC, and M is the midpoint of BC. That's going to be our given. Okay, now we want to prove angle AMC, or angle AMB is congruent to angle AMC. Okay, so from the picture, as you look at this picture, okay, one thing that you look at here, you know they have a shared side, so we can go ahead and put that in a statement more or less right away. We can say that side AM is congruent to side AM by reflexive. And I'm going to go ahead and mark that so we know that that side's congruent. And if you look at the given again, and the given, remember, I've said this for quite a while now, the given is a hint. M is the midpoint of BC, so as you look here at this picture, M right here is the midpoint of this line, so that means that this part and this part are congruent to each other. So I can say that BM is congruent to CM by the definition of midpoint. Okay, and again I need to go back and mark it on my picture. Okay, so I marked it on my picture. Now, as you look at your picture, do you have enough information to prove the triangle is congruent? And sure you do. You can do it by side, side, side. So I say triangle AMC is congruent to triangle AMB. And this is by side, side, side. And now the last part says we want to prove that these two angles are congruent to each other, AMB and AMC, with these two angles. Well, I can say that now, that those two angles are congruent to each other. Angle AMB is congruent to angle AMC, and I've already proven the triangle is congruent, so I know that all the corresponding parts are now congruent. So this would be CPCTC. Okay. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, now as you look at this last proof here, okay, as you look at this last proof, I'll set up your line there in the middle for you. And what I want you to do, again, I want you to hit pause here and see if you can come up with the answers on this proof. I will tell you that in this proof, there are 5 steps. Okay, now that you've paused the video, let's take and let's add in here our given. And our given is that KH is congruent to NH. And angle L is congruent to angle M. And we know that that's our given. And they have it marked in your picture. Now, this one's a little bit different because if you look at your proof, then now in the proof, they're telling you that H is the midpoint of LM. Okay. Now, we still have to go through and try and prove our triangle's congruent. Okay. Now, if we say H is the midpoint of LM, eventually, you're going to say somewhere in your proof, if you'll notice, that LH and MH are congruent to each other. So you're going to say that somewhere in your proof. Okay. Now, as we go through and we look, you're given an angle and you have a side. Now, if you look at the type of picture we have, you should have noticed right away one of the easy things that you can mark and that they really give you, and that's vertical angles. So my first step here is going to be to put in that angle KHL is congruent to angle NHM, and that's by vertical angles theorem, or vertical angles are congruent. Okay, now again, once you do that step, go ahead and mark your angles here. And I'm going to mark it with 2 spots there, since I already have one. And if you look at your triangle now, amazingly enough, you have enough to prove it because you've got angle, angle, side, and angle, angle, side in both triangles. So now I can say that the 2 triangles are congruent to each other. So I'm going to say triangle KHL is congruent to triangle NHM, and this is by angle, angle, side. Okay, angle, angle, side. Now, let's go back and look at our given, or our proof, what we want us to prove. They want us to prove that H is the midpoint of LM. Okay, H is the midpoint. So now, in order for me to prove that that's the midpoint, I need to know that these 2 segments here are congruent to each other. Well, they are because of CPCTC, because I know that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So in this one, I'm going to say LH is congruent to MH by CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And if I know that these are congruent to each other, then I know that H is the midpoint of LM by the definition of a midpoint. Now, again, this one's a little bit different because it adds an extra step in there, but you're going to start to see this a little bit more as you're going through your proofs. Okay? All right, so this concludes section 4.4, part 2. Don't forget to complete your WSQ.